Welcome back to Random History. I'm your navigator as we explore the little-known events and people that make history such an amazing subject. If you're new to this journey, these are not the stories you would have heard about in school. In fact, if you did hear about them, you're likely to think that they could not possibly be real. But they are. So saddle up as we navigate the obscure, the explosive, and downright weird stuff, one random tale at a time. Throughout history, mankind has always tried to harness nature, to use it to our advantage. On Christmas Eve, 1776, General George Washington took advantage of nature in a last-ditch gamble to save our infant country, inspiring one of the most iconic images of the Revolution, and adding several myths to the birth of our nation. The United States had only declared its independence a few months earlier, and found itself on the ropes. This was Washington's Hail Mary play. Picture it. It's December 25th, 1776. It's late at night, and it's pitch black. It's sleeting sideways, and the temperature's dropping through the 20s. You're there along with 2,400 half-naked, starving American soldiers that are about to attempt the most insane river crossing in military history. Because if they don't, there's no United States the following week. This is the story, the true story, of the night America was saved by a bunch of freezing, ordinary guys who had literally nothing left except cold steel, colder balls, and one 44-year-old Virginian who decided Christmas was the perfect time to roll the dice on the entire revolution. Here we go. First, the situation is way worse than your 8th grade textbook in history ever admitted. By mid-December 1776, the Continental Army was on life support. New York, gone. New Jersey, fallen. Morale, non-existent. Shoes? Maybe. Military enlistments, 95% of them would expire within a week. December 31st. Thomas Paine is literally marching barefoot with these guys as he writes one of the most enduring opening lines in American literature. Quote, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from service of their country." End quote. Washington reads the pamphlet by campfire, looks out at his 4,500 remaining men, many wrapped in blankets because they have no coats, and said basically, "One last play or we're done." The play? A surprise attack on the Hessian garrison at Trenton, New Jersey, on the morning after Christmas. The target? 1,400 professional German mercenaries under the command of Colonel Johann Rall. Rall is a legend. He fought all over Europe, and he thinks that American rebels are peasants who run away when you yell loud enough. He's getting drunk every night and ignoring warnings that Washington is coming. His exact attitude was, "Let them come. We'll fight them with the bayonet." Famous last words. Washington's plan was simple, on paper. Cross the Delaware River after dark on Christmas night at a place called McConkey's Ferry. Then march 9 miles in whatever weather shows up. Then hit Trenton from 2 directions at 8 a.m. sharp. The password for that night? Victory or death. And Washington isn't joking. By 4 p.m. Christmas Day, a nor'easter slams in. Rain, sleet, 40-mile-an-hour winds, temperature crashing. The river is running high and full of ice cakes the size of pickup trucks. The boats are called Durham boats. They're 60 feet long, narrow, and used as iron ore haulers, normally poled by 2 professionals. Tonight, they're crewed by the 14th Continental Regiment, fishermen and sailors from Marblehead, Massachusetts, commanded by Colonel John Glover. Without these web-footed lunatics, the entire thing is over before it even starts. Washington steps into the first boat, stands up in the bow the entire time. Because the boat is so packed, he actually gave his seat up to 2 freezing teenagers. That's why in all the paintings and images, he's standing. Not for drama, for basic human decency. In Washington's original timeline, everybody was supposed to be across the river by midnight. In reality, it took until 3 a.m. They are now 3 hours late, soaked to the bone, and still have to march 9 miles through a blizzard with 18 cannons. At one point, Washington looked at the ice, looked at his watch, and said one of the most iconic lines of the Revolution: "We'll either surprise them all or none at all." The march was brutal. The men were bleeding through the rags they had wrapped around their feet, some leaving red footprints in the snow. 2 guys straight up froze to death and were carried by their friends. Muskets were so wet they wouldn't fire. Washington's final order: bayonets only. By 6 a.m. it was still dark, still storming, and the troops were still 2 miles away from Trenton. Washington halted the column, rode to the front, and said, "Soldiers, press on. We have no time left and no home to retreat to." Then, as the sun starts to come up, surprise is slipping away. By 8:05, Captain Alexander Hamilton's 2 guns unload on King Street and open up with double canister. Hessians spill out of the houses in nightshirts, holding their pants, trying to form ranks in the street. Rahl comes stumbling out, hungover, still pulling on his coat, yelling for his horse. 45 minutes later, it's over. The Hessians surrendered in the Presbyterian churchyard. American combat deaths, 0. Total casualties for the operation: the 2 dead who froze on the march and 5 wounded. For the Hessians, there were 22 dead, 83 wounded, 896 prisoners. All of their cannons were captured, 1,200 muskets, and a mountain of supplies. Washington walked among the prisoners. He saw Rahl dying against an apple tree and ordered the Hessian surgeon to treat him first. He was a class act, even in victory. Now, that's basically a thumbnail of what happened that night. But there are a few myths that cropped up that really need to be exposed. First, Washington stood just so he could get that dramatic pose. Reality, he gave up his seat to 2 cold teenagers. And besides, Emanuel Leutze, the artist who painted Washington crossing the Delaware, wasn't there to see the dramatic pose. Myth number 2. It happened at sunrise with the troops flying the Betsy Ross flag. The reality, it was pitch black, storming, and the troops marched under the Grand Union flag. If you don't know what the Grand Union flag looks like, it's the red and white alternating stripes with the British Union Jack, where the Field of Stars is today. Myth number 3, the river was so frozen that they were able to walk across. The reality, the ice was so thick that Glover's sailors had to smash a path through with their oars. And myth number 4, it was a big, glorious battle. The reality, it was 45 minutes of street fighting against confused, half-dressed professionals who never even were able to get into formation. Trenton was a turning point. A week later, Washington crossed the Delaware again, this time the 3rd time in 10 days, and he smashed Cornwallis's rear guard at Princeton. The soldiers, whose enlistment was up on December 31st, took a $10 bounty to stay beyond January 1st. French spies in Philadelphia heard the victories of Trenton and Princeton, sending messages back to France saying, these guys might actually win. 2 years later, France joined us and threw the weight of their navy and military support behind us. All because 2,400 desperate men in a snowstorm decided Christmas night was a good night to die or become legends. Now, you probably never heard about the real MVPs in school. The first, Colonel John Glover and the Marblehead Fishermen. Without them, the boats would sink. Game over. Henry Knox, the 300-pound ex-bookseller who got 80 cannons across the ice and into battery in 4 hours. Lieutenant James Monroe, future president, 18 years old, gets his arm nearly shot off capturing the Hessian guns. And every private who marched barefoot and still fixed bayonets when ordered. So, next time you're complaining that it's cold as you're waiting for your Uber, remember, 2,400 guys walked 9 miles through a blizzard with no shoes to make sure you even have a country to complain in. That's it. That's the real story of Washington crossing the Delaware. Washington's feat that cold Christmas morning has been immortalized in numerous books, films, and paintings. Even Jim Davis of Garfield fame has recreated the scene. There's even a meme that describes the event rather succinctly. But sometimes the true story gets hidden within the legend. And today, our true hero's story fits that situation as well. I'm sure you've heard of George Armstrong Custer, the golden-haired boy general who rode to immortality and tragedy on a Montana hillside in 1876. But there are a couple other Custers that rode that day that almost no one remembers. George's 2 brothers, Thomas and Boston Custer. One, a peacemaker, and the other, a man braver, wilder, and, by the only objective measure the Army has, twice as heroic as his famous brother. His name was Thomas Ward Custer, Tom to everyone who loved him, and he is the only human being in American history to win the Medal of Honor 3 times, twice in the same war, 4 days apart. Unfortunately, years later, one of Tom's 3 medals was rescinded due to politics at the time. So today, we're going to discuss the story of those 4 days and the Christmas day a few years later that almost gave him the 3rd Medal of Honor. Today's true hero, the Forgotten Custer. In Harrison County, Ohio in 1845, George Armstrong Custer is 5 years old, his little brother Tom, 3. But the pattern was already set. Wherever George went, Tom followed. Usually at a dead run, fists flying if anyone dared tease his big brother. By the time the Civil War broke out, George, a newly minted West Point lieutenant, Tom, 16, lying about his age, begging to enlist, but George refused to sign the papers. So Tom forged them. He joined the 21st Ohio Volunteer Infantry as a private. Within months, he was promoted to corporal, then sergeant. Then, because the Custer luck is real, he transferred to his brother's staff in the 6th Michigan Cavalry when George took command in 1864. That is when everything changed. It's the death rattle of the Confederacy. Lee is fleeing after Petersburg falls. On Easter Monday, April 3rd, 1865, George Custer's division slams into a Confederate cavalry at Namazine Church in Virginia. Picture it. Dawn, fog, wet fields, smoke everywhere. The rebel flag of WHF Lee's cavalry is snapping above a stone wall. Whoever captured that flag would break the enemy brigade. George Custer turns to his staff and says, quote, "I want that flag." Every officer looked away, except one. Tom saw the color bearer about 30 yards ahead, put his spurs to the horse, jumped the wall, and ran straight at him. He took aim with his pistol. Click. Misfire. So he shot him through the chest with his Spencer carbine, grabbed the staff, and the silk tore away in his hand. Then about 20 Confederates decided they wanted it back. Tom, now alone, on foot, and surrounded, a rebel lieutenant lunged with the saber, sliced Tom across the face from cheekbone to jaw, blood everywhere. Tom shot him, point blank, yanked the flag off the broken staff, stuffed it inside his jacket, and somehow fought his way back to Union lines. He collapsed at his brother's feet, handed George the torn banner, and, according to eyewitnesses, said, "Here, Audie, I got it for you." Then he passed out. The next day, April 4th, 1865, the citation was written. First Lieutenant Thomas W. Custer is awarded the Medal of Honor for the capture of a regimental flag at Namazine Church, Virginia, April 3rd, 1865. For most people, that would be the highlight of their career. But for Tom Custer, well, he was just getting started. 3 days after Namazine, Lee's army was disintegrating. At Sailor's Creek, sometimes called the Gettysburg of the South for the Confederacy, Custer's division hit the rebel infantry head-on. Another flag is planted on a rise, this one belonging to the 2nd North Carolina Infantry. Whoever takes it will shatter the last cohesive Confederate brigade in the Army of the Northern Virginia. George Custer again said, "Boys, I want that flag." Same pause, same glance around the staff. Then the same single rider breaking from the line. Lieutenant Tom Custer rode straight into the enemy ranks as if he bore a charmed life. The color bearer shot him through the shoulder at 10 paces. Tom kept coming, shot the man dead, seized the flag, and turned to ride back. The entire rebel line fired a volley. His horse was killed under him. Tom was shot again, this time in the face, the bullet entering near the mouth but exiting behind the ear. Miraculously, the bullet missed every major artery. Tom, bleeding from the face, the shoulder, and that earlier saber wound still oozing, crawled through the mud, flag clutched to his chest, until Michigan troopers were able to drag him behind the lines. He lived. The flag was captured. And 3 days later, April 9th, 1865, the very day Lee surrenders at Appomattox, Tom is awarded his 2nd Medal of Honor. Let that sink in for a second. 2 Medals of Honor in 4 days, both for personally capturing enemy flags in hand-to-hand combat, both times wounded in the face. Tom Custer was 20 years old. The Army actually had to change its regulations because of Tom Custer. Until 1918, the Medal of Honor was the only decoration for valor, but no one had ever earned 2 in the same war. The War Department finally ruled that yes, Tom could keep them both, and wear them both, making him the first and only soldier to ever wear 2 Medals of Honor at the same time. Thomas Custer's 2 citations are published in the U.S. Army Center of Military History database and reprinted in full in J. Monahan's Custer, The Life of General George Armstrong Custer. The Christiansey letter is held in the Bentley Historical Library, University of Michigan, and quoted in Tom Hatch, The Custer Companion. Now, let's fast forward 3 years. The Civil War is over. Tom is now a captain, still riding with his brother in the new 7th Cavalry on the Great Plains. On Christmas morning, 1868, the 7th Cavalry is pursuing Black Kettle's Cheyenne village after the controversial fight at the Washita the month before. A small band of warriors broke away and made a stand along the Wichita River. Once again, because, well, some things never change, a Cheyenne war flag fluttered defiantly. Once again, General George Armstrong Custer said, "I want that flag." And once again, only one officer charged ahead. Tom, this time accompanied by Private Frederick Stowe and Corporal Charles Dickens, charged straight into the Cheyenne line. Tom shot one warrior off his horse, captured another one alive, and seized the society banner, a red flag with a white buffalo skull. All 3 men, Tom, Stowe, and Dickens, were awarded the Medal of Honor in 1869 for that Christmas Day fight. But here's the catch. In 1917, a review board reviewed all 2,625 medals awarded before 1916. They revoked 911 of them for being, quote, not in combat with an enemy of the United States, close quote. The 3 Christmas 1868 awards were among those revoked because the Army decided the Indian Wars didn't count as a war against a foreign enemy. But Tom's 2 Civil War medals both stood. The Christmas one, unfortunately, did not. So officially, he remains a double recipient, but unofficially, he came within a bureaucratic pen stroke of being the only triple Medal of Honor recipient in history. 10 years later, on a hot June afternoon in Montana, Tom Custer once again riding at his brother's side one last time. This is when the 7th Cavalry was annihilated at the Little Bighorn. Tom's body was found near George's, mutilated almost beyond recognition, reportedly shot multiple times with both arms hacked off, as if the Lakota and Cheyenne remembered the reckless blonde captain who kept charging their flags. Tom was 31 years old. George got the fame, Tom got the medals, and the scars to prove them. Now, I mentioned earlier that there was a 3rd Custer brother on the battlefield that day. His name was Boston, and he was in charge of the pack train. As soon as he heard shots fired, he and a nephew rushed to be by the older brother's side. Unfortunately, all 4 were killed, and their bodies recovered on Last Stand Hill. So the next time someone mentions Custer's last stand, remember, there were actually 3 Custers and their nephew that died on that hill. 1 famous, 2 brothers forgotten, and one of those forgotten brothers was the braver of the 3. And so, on 2 very different Christmas nights, separated by a century, yet bound by the same defiant heartbeat of this republic, ordinary men became immortal. One crossed an ice-choked river in the black of a December storm to strike for liberty and give a dying revolution new life. The other, 99 years later, almost to the day, rode boot to boot with his brothers into a Montana valley, carrying the flag forward until it could go no further, giving the last full measure so that the nation Washington had saved that night might endure. Different battles, different outcomes, yet the same fire burned in both. The same prayer rose from the lips on the Delaware, from the dust-choked throats beside the greasy grass. Lord, let us not be found wanting. Tonight, as lights twinkle on trees and carols drift through the snow, we remember them. We remember the boatmen who pulled through the ice for a general who refused to quit. We remember the boyish Tom Custer, 2 medals of honor on his breast, charging into legend with his brothers' names on his lips. They are not gone. Every time we choose courage over comfort, every time we stand when it is easier to kneel, every time we keep faith with those who went before, they cross the river again. They ride with us still. So when you go home tonight, light 1 extra candle. Tell the children the stories. And when you lift your glass this Christmas, lift it high and say softly but clearly, to George Washington and his ragged Continentals on the Delaware, to Tom, Audie, and Boston beneath a Montana sky, to all who kept the faith when the night was coldest and the dawn uncertain. Merry Christmas, gentlemen. The republic you saved still stands. Rest easy. We have the watch. This concludes my Christmas episode, and as I said earlier, sometimes the true story gets lost somewhere in the legend. So this brings us to the end of another episode of Random History. I hope you enjoyed it and will come back and listen to future episodes. If you'd like to view the transcript or sources for this episode, just click the link in the description. You can also make suggestions for future topics by clicking that same link or shooting me an email. As always, I want to thank Argos Media for producing Random History and to thank my wife for her continued support and inspiration. Until next time, make some history of your own. Navigator out.